Okay, we're going to pick up again on chapter 2, page 27. So the theme of this chapter is prajna, but it's more than prajna, and it's more than just wisdom. And it's talking about human nature. It's talking about what it means to be fully human. And from this perspective of the Sixth Patriarch, this capacity that he calls Mahaprajna Paramita, the great perfection of wisdom or great wisdom perfecting, is not something that is transcendent or divine or outside the human experience, but right core and central to it. It is, from his definition, what it means to be fully human, which may surprise us because we tend to think of these things as religious or metaphysical doctrines or teachings. But he's not approaching it that way. He is actually saying what we take to be the ordinary elements of our life, from his perspective, all the small and petty things we divide our life and consciousness into, are really just like dreams, illusions, bubbles, and shadows. They're passing phenomena. And what's true and real and what's very substantial is, to an extent, and I won't say hidden from us, we have blinkers on, or we have blinders on to it, in a sense. And so it's not so much that it's hidden from us, but we turn our back on it and divide our attention, divide our consciousness into 1,000 different things, none of which lead to any meaning and deliver anything at all. And then we spend our life chasing after this, pursuing this, projecting this, and when it's done, it all evaporates with the last breath. And so there's a sense of anxiety throughout life that we're missing something, we're not really getting it. We know this intrinsically, we have this sense of what he's talking about, and yet it seems so distant, so elusive. And as the life goes on, as we get older, this taking stock of what we made of our life starts to weigh and look more, it's more clear to us that what he says later, that we spent a frantic passage through the most precious thing we have, which is our existence. So what he's trying to do now is to sort of really make a strong statement. He's talking to this assembly and saying, life is short, death comes quickly, you don't know when it's going to come. You have this wonderful opportunity of both the tension of dissatisfaction and anxiety that's rooted in your knowing everything is impermanent, and yet you have the bright jewel of insight or discernment that allows you to know that and to make something of it and to take hold of it. And so this potential is what he's calling all these, what he calls his good and wise friends to here. Pay attention to this. Pay attention to the here and now. Pay attention to humanity. Pay attention to your own mind and being, because that's the ground of liberation. That's the ground, he says, this is where all Buddhas come from. This is the source and the origin. All Buddhas of the past, present, and future emerge from this at the end of the second paragraph on page 27. And now he started this by saying something very shocking. Ordinary people themselves are Buddhas. Wow. He's not saying what the common understanding is, and probably this audience had it, that the Buddhas are some rarefied, out of the ordinary, extraordinary, almost ethereal divine beings, that they're beyond the conditioned, created world that we live in, that there's a split between the sacred and the profane, or the ordinary and the extraordinary, or worldly and world transcending. He said all of that is also a projection of your divided consciousness, and that's not real either. But when you think in this way, It takes the pressure off of you recognizing that that is inherent and whole within you, and you need to work on it. So he says, you are, as an ordinary person, a Buddha. However, and it's a caveat, you are covered over, your bodhi is, and we used the words last week, it's frozen, it's locked up. When it is thawed by this wisdom, by this virtue, by this concentration, it flows, it's free-flowing, it attaches to nothing, it goes everywhere, it knows and sees all, but we've frozen it down, we've limited it through what he calls klesha, or the fandao, and we turn the bodhi into the divided, afflicted state. So then he's giving both a description of what we've done, description of that condition, and he's also giving a prescription. In other words, a medical antidote to this. So built into his teaching all the time is descriptive, prescriptive, defining and releasing or liberating. He's never just expounding some abstract truth, but he's always pointing to this truth and then immediately catalyzing in his listeners the fact that this truth is immediate whole within them right here and now. So then we start tonight, and he says, use this great wisdom. This is not something you have. Wisdom is not something you get. It's not a possession, but it's an actual functioning. It's something you do. I don't know what, I guess you'd say wisdoming, but it doesn't sound right. But if you think about it, the common idea is when you go to a church, you go to a temple, there's this idea that one has that I will get something special, I will obtain something, I'll be saved, or I will be united with the divine, or I will get enlightened. In the Buddhist sense, I'm going to get enlightened. Have you gotten enlightened yet? Oh, no, man, I haven't gotten enlightened. I'm really working on it. Well, work harder. Or, I'm going to get something, get wisdom. And what he's suggesting here is you don't get enlightened, you become enlightened. And moreover, you don't even become enlightened, you become awakened. And it's something you turn into rather than something you get. You see, and so it's a whole different thing. It's not like you get it. You already have it, so you unleash it, you untangle it, you free it up. So there's not the sense that then you get wisdom. Wisdom is something you do. If you do it, it's wisdom. If you don't, it's not. He's making it very dynamic, very functional. In Chinese, this is yung, the character yung, rather than ti. Ti means substance, abstract, metaphysical, theory. But yung is the doing. And it's in the doing that you see the truth. It's not that the truth is there and then there's something else. You don't see it unless you're doing it. So this is the idea that principles and specifics, or truth and functioning, interact, and they're mutually interpenetrating. So that in the daily activities of your eating, sleeping, walking, friendships, relationships, jobs, and whatnot, wisdom is either manifesting or it isn't. It's not apart from this. It's not like, yeah, I just did this, and now I'm going home. Wisdom. No. Is working through, just as your blood's working through your body, wisdom is working through your consciousness or not. You can constrict it and tie it off, but it's ever present, ever working, ever flowing. You just have to avail yourself of it and use it correctly, and then it's a functioning capacity rather than an abstract possession or entity. So he says, and that's where we start tonight, you should use this great wisdom to see through the defiling afflictions of the 5 skandhas. Those who cultivate in this way are certain to realize the awakening of the Buddha, or of a Buddha, transforming the 3 poisons of morality, 3 poisons into morality, contemplative, calm, and insight. Okay, so see back and forth the theory and the practice point here. First, you use the great wisdom, and then on the second to last line, transmuting, changing, altering. And again, this is dynamic. This is fluid. It's not static. And so there's this constant sense that you are working with the chemicals of your being, the chemicals of your existence, and you're transforming them. What are you transforming? He says 3 poisons into morality, contemplative, calm, and insight. So these are technical terms. 3 poisons. It's not DDT or, three poisons. These are all, I guess you'd say, poetical or figurative language, not literal. Three poisons.
Greed, anger, delusion.
Right. Everybody knows these. This is Buddhist Catechism 101. Let's translate it as craving or thirst, and then anger and aversion, and then finally, I would say misunderstanding, delusion. Those are poisons, and these are toxic things that, unfortunately, it's not so simple that they come from the outside. They're actually generated within, with confusion leads to the other. So if you reverse them, really it's the thirst and the aversion that comes from the misunderstanding, the misperception. But they function simultaneously. And this poison or this toxicity is the afflictions. It's the wisdom that's been turned into this in our system. So we've turned this natural wisdom into these three tendencies. The tendency to be confused, to be muddled, to not understand things clearly, to see things through lenses that we construct and lead to either grasping and attaching, wanting, or fearing and pushing away. And we calculate and we divide the whole world into those things I like and those things I don't like, including people, cars, computers, schools, even yourself. I like this about myself, but I don't like this about myself. I love me today, tomorrow I hate me. This is all the grasping and aversion. And this, in turn, this misunderstanding, then we went over this last week, leads to Trishna, or the thirst. And the Buddha described this as three particular thirsts. So everybody remembers these, right? You remember your poisons? Everybody remember the three thirsts so we don't have to, yes? No?
I wasn't here.
You weren't here. That's okay. If I tell you what they are, you might thirst for them. If I don't tell you what they are. So basically, he says there's three. When you do not see things correctly, when you're projecting, when you're dividing your consciousness, and when you're spooked by the fact of the sense of I gets under, how should I say, it gets under attack by reality. The I meets reality, and there's a little bit of disagreement. Because reality says everything's impermanent, everything's passing, there is no self-existing entity, everything's interdependent. You say, yeah, that's true of everything except me. And so you immediately propose a me in opposition to this reality, and thus begins, with confusion, the next steps of, I'm going to grasp and attach to what is going to reinforce my identity in me, and I'm going to push away and keep at odds that which threatens it, including mortality, including aging, including sickness, including loss. And so we are constantly searching for perfection. We're searching for perfection. Not perfection in the accomplishment of our nature, but perfection of immunizing ourselves against impermanence, mortality, and the passing of stuff. And most of life consists of that mad, grasping, frantic search to last. So the Buddha says it manifests in three types of thirst. One is called kama, which means a thirst for sort of pleasures, almost hedonistic pleasures. It's the idea, I know everything's passing, I know it's impermanent. I eat, drink, and be merry because tomorrow I may die. You all have heard this, right? I'm not going to ask you which espouse to it or which of you follow. I'm just saying you heard it, you know about it. But it's a kind of hedonistic statement. Eat, drink, and be merry because tomorrow you may not be around to eat, drink, and be merry. And if you think about it, there's so much to eat and drink and be merry about that it's not possible to do it in one day. So this is an exhausting proposition. It sounds like it's really easy, but it's like, wow, so if I took some speed and I didn't sleep, I could eat, drink, and be merry for a longer period of time. This sounds like a winning. That's what the poet says, I'm burning my candle at both ends, it will not last the night. But oh, my friends and oh, my foes, how brilliant is the light, and it's gone. Okay, so you can frantically get involved in this. And it's a burnout path, basically. If you want to read about it, you can read about Byron, by Byron's Don Juan, which is a description of the young man who pursues this life, and by 25, it's all over. There's no taste left, all the flavor's gone. He's exhausted one's essential energy in the pursuit of these things. And as each flavor comes in, there's a corresponding drop afterwards. So the eating After a certain point, you can only eat so much. You can only eat so much gourmet, and after a while, it dulls the tongue. It ruins the body. It gives you diabetes, and so on and so forth. Drinking is the same way. You can only drink to oblivion, and then it's over with. You can't drink past oblivion. And then you revive again and you drink some more. Well, I don't know, some of you have not done it. You think there's a point. You can drink to death too. You can actually have college campuses. This happens, by the way. What? Yeah, people. They have, what's the word for that? Alcoholic poisoning. Right. And that's called rushing to fraternity. But you can do that, and being married is pretty tough. You've seen the poster on the back of the, "Are we happy yet?" On the back of the car is like, how do you get married? I mean, how do you really nail it down? Where do you go to get married? You sit at home alone? Well, not unless you're kind of awakened. Then you're merry all the time. So where do you go? Where is merry? Now, merry means M-E-R-R, not M-A-R-R-Y. I just want to eat, drink, and be merry. No, it's M-E-R-R-Y. Well, M-A-R-I might work for a while, but as you know, that passes too, and so you're caught in that cycle. It's really, but if you really think about it, when you seriously pursue eat, drink, and be merry, it's a limited strategy, and it's got its drawbacks. But what Byron is doing in Don Juan is he's saying he has led this life. At the age of 25, the taste and the thrill and the pleasure is gone. He's in existential angst. He's in a doldrum because it didn't deliver. The second thirst is called bhava. And the Buddha said this one is you know that you can't eat, drink, and be merry, and end it all. So you try to avoid impermanence by seeking for continued existence or immortality. You want to have continuing life, continuing existence, and we talked about this, as it manifests in diet, pursuit of the perfect diet or the perfect exercise regimen. I was just visiting, my family's visiting here, and they're staying at a hotel, and I went down to find them, and I had to walk through the spa. And the spa consists of a lot of people in that second thirst, which is they're all in these machines exercising, and they have all this organic food that's there to drink while you exercise, and they're strengthening and fortifying the body against the vicissitudes of decay. And it's actually a good metaphor for this is Sisyphus. Now, you know about Sisyphus? Anybody know about Sisyphus? Sisyphus is, let's see, where does it come from? No? Greek? Yeah, I heard some say Greek. Yeah, it's Greek to me, I don't know. So, Sisyphus was punished by the gods for something. The gods are always punishing these Greek heroes. It's just endless. There's no Prometheus gets punished, they all get punished. All the heroes get punished. But in any way, his particular punishment was to push this big rock up a mountain. And as he got closer and closer to the top, he got more and more tired. The rock got heavier and heavier, and then it would roll down again. And of course, he'd have to start it over again. So the Sisyphus, the Sisyphean dilemma, is you're constantly striving to get this rock to the top of the hill, I guess, and maybe push it over the other side, but you never get up there. And so this is this constant tormenting quest for the unachievable. And immortality is like this. We know you can't do it, and yet we do not stop trying. We do not stop. Every morning in front of the mirror, we're doing a little quest for immortality. Every visit to the hair salon or the spa or to the health club, it's a little quest for immortality. All our insurance and health plans are based on this longing. I never understood insurance. I just never, I thought, well, life insurance, whoa, I like that idea. That would insure my life. And they're saying, well, no, not exactly. I was young when I heard about that, and somebody came to sell my parents' life insurance, and I thought, that's great, they'll live forever if they buy this. And then the agent himself didn't tell me, and my sister said, you're so stupid. It doesn't mean that you get insured life. It means if they die, you get some money. And I was like, oh, okay, so what is... Life insurance doesn't actually insure life, but it plays into that second thirst that you can do something to preserve it. And the third thirst is vibhava, which means the thirst for non-existence, which seems counterintuitive, but it means I do not want to feel pain and suffering. I do not want to feel impermanence. I don't want to feel the angst of the existential life, and therefore I numb myself against feeling. And so it can manifest either as alcoholism or drug addiction, or any turning down of the senses so that you don't feel anymore. And it's very interesting because it's very subtle how this can happen. The most obvious forms are addictions. But you can do this with a flat screen, at home. You can do this with books. You can do this with sex. You can do this with gambling. You can lose yourself and your sensibilities in all of these. And that's why the Buddha said these three can operate simultaneously. You can actually do the third. By the eat, drinking, and marry, you can actually seem to be numbing yourself against suffering and angst and so forth. So these are the three talked about, and that's the craving part of the three poisons. Clear? Any questions? Troubles? Okay, so where were we when we got to the three poisons? Okay, so what he's saying is you should use this great wisdom to penetrate and see through these. And by these he's saying you cultivate then also what's intrinsic is, this is in Sanskrit, it usually is Shila Samadhi Prajna, for what we translate here as morality, contemplative calm, and insight. Morality doesn't here mean a moral code like commandments or precepts. It's talking about something far more subtle and deep. It's talking about a kind of intrinsic virtue, or a almost innate goodness of being, of character. Sometimes following rules and precepts can support it or point to it, but ultimately it is not extrinsic, it's intrinsic. And he's holding here that it is a natural tendency or sensibility that one has. And so it's your natural inclination towards goodness, towards virtue, towards a kind of wholeness and integrity, and a transparency. Inside and outside are the same. And you're not harming yourself and you're not harming others, and you're aware of the difference. And so it's much more fluid and responsive rather than just following a code. And often you can follow the code and still be off in your Shila. In other words, it requires interpretation, it requires nimbleness and discernment and judgment, all involved in this idea of Shila. The contemplative calm is presented as a kind of equanimity, or a level and even mind and nature and emotion, so that you're aware of things. You're very keenly aware, but you aren't grasping and attaching to them or pushing them away or rejecting them. So sometimes this is compared to a mirror that is able to see and reflect what's coming in front of it, but doesn't hold on to it and doesn't anticipate before it comes and doesn't hold on to it as it passes. So contemplative samadhi is walking, standing, sitting, even lying down in sleep. It's a full functioning of the unattached, liberated consciousness. It's not something you enter or leave. So
I'm curious, what is the relationship of samadhi as you've defined it with mindfulness as it's now come into being?
oh, well, there's a topic. Mindfulness is
It's a different word.
it's a different word. It's a different exercise. But mindfulness as it's now used generally, and I'm saying in consumer spirituality, if I could use that word, is not a whole lot different than things my grandparents would talk about as fortitude and concentration. And, in other words, what mindfulness means, you see, you can focus your attention to achieve a goal. Okay, so athletes can do this. Business people thrive on doing this, closing deals, seeing opportunities, and and so forth. Mindfulness is just an application of attention to a focused object of something you want to do. But soldiers do this, assassins do this. Assassins have a lot of mindfulness. Remember that the act of mindfulness, bringing your attention or concentration to an object of something, can be something wholesome, if it leads to this samadhi, all-encompassing, or it can be quite narrow and obsessive and, I would say, harmful. So you have to distinguish, and it's not. And so it's not a withdrawal from reality, but it's a clear seeing of reality, at the same time not being phased or turned by that reality, yet being able to work with it unencumbered. So it's a very different kind of sense. Also, sometimes mindfulness is used now in relation to stress reduction. You know, and that's good. Reducing stress is good. I'm all for it. But again, what he's talking about is big-time stress reduction. He's talking about the stress reduction of death and rebirth. It's a different. You know, you got to understand. He's saying stress, dukkha. That's, you know. So if you say dukkha reduction, well, what does that mean? Well, dukkha reduction is different than stress reduction. Because dukkha is talking about the fundamental human dissatisfaction that's based on these thirst and craving, which is based on misunderstanding. So this is deeply rooted stuff we're talking about here. This is not something you do in an Arizona spa at a weekend by lifting a horse's foot and cleaning it off or something and having rocks put on your chest or crystals on your third eye. I mean, you're talking about a fundamental transformation of your being and your consciousness. So mindfulness is good. You know, it's really good, but it's a limited strategy of liberation in terms of what's being talked about here. So that's all I want to point. I'm not poo-pooing it. Don't get me wrong. But I must say that the NSA and the Defense Department's interested in mindfulness. You got to ask a minute. Now they're not interested in the birth and death, and they're not interested in the reduction of total dissatisfaction and suffering. But they're interested in mindfulness. Why? Okay. CEOs, Google's interested in mindfulness. Oh, really? Wonder why. Let's see, what do they do? Oh, they sell things. Okay? So advertising is the key area of mindfulness practice. The advertising industry. You've got some really mindful people in there. They are mindful of themselves and they're mindful of others. They have techniques that can tell you more about your mind than you can. They know your mind really well. They know your mind at the samskaric level, the deepest level where all habits and habituations form. And they can do functional MRI testing, and they can make a product that'll make you salivate, and you won't even have control over it. You see, and they're interested in mindfulness, so they're interested in getting your mindfulness. So this time we just flew to LA, and my mindfulness was on the chopping block. From the moment we got to the airport, in LA, of course, it's on the chopping block everywhere. But there was all these assaults on my attention and mindfulness, nonstop. Now, if I'm sitting alone in a room, it's a struggle for me to have some mindfulness and just keep my mind from wandering. But when you go out, everybody's after your attention. Everybody wants your mindfulness, wants your attention. So even the tray where I put my stuff in now has an ad on the bottom of it. It used to be just a dumb plastic tray, and I could look at that and I would say, oh, emptiness. But now I see toothpaste, shoes, buy this, gargle, pimple removal. It's all on the bottom of my plastic tray. And then when I go through to get my gas now, on the little screen, there's a television ad thing coming on the screen. So I'm pumping my gas and I'm getting hit. And somebody wants my mind. They want my attention. And every place you go now, and it's like at the airport itself, quiet? No. I used to go to the airport in the 50s and 60s, and you'd meet people and talk. Nobody talks to anybody anymore because there's constant stuff coming over the top. CNN's running on constant screams, and anybody wants sort of mindfulness plugs in the iPods, and they're mindful. But actually what they're doing is they're pulling their consciousness back from awareness to try to salvage a little bit of it. But it's defensive rather than inclusive and expansive. So you see, these terms, any term that gets, this is harsh, excuse me, I'm not Marx, but any term that gets put into a capitalist consumer market economy structure, you got to be careful of. Nirvana's for sale. It's a new Lexus, right? So you got to be careful. The association of these terms with these three thirsts is what you want to watch for. That's what I'm sort of my editorial tonight, sorry. Didn't mean to go down that road, but... Okay, so he says, all of you should use this great wisdom to see through the defiling afflictions. And one of those ways you could say see through the defiling afflictions, look what is robbing your consciousness, see through it. Okay? You know, from one perspective, we are hungry fish in a pool, and there's a constant source of people fishing for our attention, for our consciousness. If you don't see it through yourself, there's no way you're going to stop it outside, okay? You can go through the technique of covering your head in a bag and saying, I am now mindful, but you're not. You're just insulating yourself, and so it's not real samadhi or not real contemplative calm unless you can see it, hear it, smell it, taste it, and not let your essential nature go and unite with it and think it's me and mine. That's the difference. So right now, when he's saying use wisdom to see through the defiling afflictions, of course he's talking at the deep psychological level. And I'll read you the list tonight. But to get to the inner realm of the defiling afflictions, you have to deal with the external dust. So partly what monasteries and temples or aranyas, still and quiet, tranquil places, were medicine to let you get just I was thinking these guys that climbed Yosemite, and it showed some of the pictures, and like sometimes they get just a nail. You go, wow, just a nail. Well, sometimes that's all a temple is. It just gives you a nail on your own mind and consciousness for a minute. So there's enough distraction freeness here. There's enough distraction freeness here that you can, for a split second, if you're careful, listen to yourself again. Whoa. What? Listen to yourself again. I mean, it's not a given. It's not a given. When you're out there, it's really hard to listen to yourself because there's all these competing noises and sounds. So the Aranya, or why people would go to the deep valleys or the high mountains or come to these places, was because they realized without real gung fu, without real ability, their consciousness would just be pulled away from them like that. It's that quick. And it's so subliminal and at that level that you can't. So part of gaining your own liberation to deal with your own internal defilement or afflictions is to at least clear the space of dust. Create a place of awakening, a site of awakening. And sometimes that just has to be raw physical material. It's not so easy to say, yes, I heard, I will go into the marketplace and be awakened. Well, good luck if you don't have some skill to begin with. After you've sat for a long time, then try it. And you might, 5 minutes, you might last 10, and then it'll hit you again. But you need to have some contracts. Perception is based on juxtaposition. Without juxtaposition, we don't have perception. Okay? So you know it. You know the psychology experiments. Oh, I don't know who takes courses now in college. I keep hearing, well, I took courses in college, took science, math, humanities, law. Now people just take job placement courses. Okay, so they don't really do psychology, they don't really do history, literature, philosophy, they do good job, good education stuff. So again, 4 years of your life shot, wasted. But anyhow, yeah. When you do psychology, one of the experiments they do is they put a dot someplace and you look at the dot and you enter samadhi. And you look at the dot and the dot disappears. Remember those experiments? Those of you who took psychology? Or they put a gestalt or some pattern up there and you look at one part of the pattern and the other one disappears. It's called selective attention or selective inattention. It's the way the mind works. So for perception to take place, we have to have juxtaposition. Our eyes are constantly doing this. We don't even know it. Your eyes are constantly just going back and forth, creating, background, foreground, blah, 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 and that's how we see and perceive. If we didn't do that, everything would just disappear. Ooh, that's interesting, isn't it? So we're actually creating a reality with our cognitive faculties. Whoa, that's really interesting. But what I'm saying is, in this sense, we become then habituated to a cognitive pattern that we are trained ourselves to see, to feel, and whatnot. And we call this the world and reality. And so as we maintain that cognitive pattern and we go out, we actually arrange things into this field of awareness. Myself, others, that's one little pattern we set up when in fact This thing is completely interrelated to the other elements, earth, air, fire, and water of the universe. But we think it's a self-contained, hermetically sealed, autonomous me, okay? But it's not, okay? And when you die, you realize that because it all goes back to the elements again. But we maintain it, we maintain the illusion, and we do this whole thing. So sometimes when we get locked into this, and this is what is part of the skandhas here, I'm just flipping around here tonight, sorry. When he says the 5 skandhas, what he's talking about is the mind-body. The body is the first skandha, but the mind makes up those other 4, and part of that mind is the cognitive. This is samdhya, and it's the conceptualizing, making of. It's not thoughts, it's your thinking and creating of constructs to your thoughts. The 4th skandha is called samskara, and that's that when it's habituated and hardened and formed like contours. And so new experience comes in, it goes right through those contours again. You prefigure it to your contours. And that's why we selectively perceive. We select and let in what fits our contours and what we like, and we disregard the rest and pretend it doesn't exist. Okay? So that process, the Buddha is saying, is very hard to challenge. But we have to challenge it because that's what solidified us into this me and mine. And in order to break out of that, we have to work at this level to break out those cognitive samskaric formations and categories that we've locked ourselves into. We call it habituation. You can do it through culture. You can become habituated in your culture and you see everything through the eyes and the formations of your culture or your ethnicity or your gender or your age or your education or your social and economic status, right? And then you project and you create these little universes that support this with, gated communities and this kind of car and that kind of product, and you create this whole sense of, I'm in this group and I'm part of this. And this is all just dreams, illusion, bubbles, shadows. We're just like the Wizard of Oz, just making this stuff up. So the Buddha is saying, this is called liberation when you confront that. This is what it means to examine your life, the examined life not worth living. This is the self-cultivation that he's talking about. Using the wisdom, this is what it means. It doesn't mean like, oh, I have a choice coming up. I want to use my wisdom. What do you mean, use your wisdom? You're going to throw the I Ching or, go to some oracle? No, he's talking about awareness, using to cut through what's all around you. So what I'm suggesting here with the juxtaposition, sometimes what this place is about, say the Berkeley Buddhist Monastery, or a way place, or a 7-day retreat, is a shifting out of a pattern of habituation and putting yourself into another cognitive field, so to speak, temporarily. And it's not so much what you're doing in that retreat or that 7 days in the monastery, it's what you're not doing that allows a perception to happen that wouldn't happen when you're locked in. So these are these jolts that you have to do to your consciousness in order to actually see clearly, because we habituate so easily. We are such creatures of habit. It's almost scary how habituated we become in our routines. I mean, sometimes people get really habituated, almost to the point of obsessive in the way they walk, the ways they go home, the times they eat, what they eat, these whole rituals of comfort and security that we get. But even beyond that, cognitively, psychologically, emotionally, we become very habituated. And we think we're free individuals flowing through life, making free choices, but actually we're just grinding along, pushed by our habits, reflexes, from early age, from culture, from upbringing, and so forth. So when the Buddha's talking here, or when the Sixth Patriarch's talking about here, the 5 skandhas, he's talking about breaking out of this container. He's not talking about breaking them. He's not saying destroy your body, don't have feelings, don't have thoughts. He's saying, no, watch them. Watch them as they arise. Watch who's making them. Watch the maker of these. You are the maker. Your consciousness at the deepest level is the maker. You can watch as you form and set these things going. Also, momentarily in between this habituation, sometimes pause, not engage, and have a moment where you can shift the direction and the inertia of these things. And and that's what mindfulness is about. Mindfulness is about spotting that window of opportunity where you can break away from habituation, where you are neither rejecting or grabbing, but merely observing. And in that mere observation, there's a moment of freedom. a split second of freedom that you can actually see, I could go this way or that. I don't have to. But if you don't juxtapose and pull your mind in that space, which is what meditation then is about, it's not about stress reduction, it's about opening opportunities for awakening. Okay? And sometimes stress is a seed or a cause of awakening. Oops, sorry. There's constructive stress and destructive stress. Okay? Destructive stress is what we're all feeling 24/7. Parents, job, taxes, you name it. Okay? Constructive stress is what he's talking about here, which is putting your psyche on the hot plate and looking at it, taking it apart, getting to the root of your habituations and attachments. You know, when you look at the Buddha's life, you see there's a long period of real difficult stress. It's not easy to examine your life, to examine the mind. It's Socrates, you examine life is not worth living. Right. Well, why don't more people do it? Because it's a hell of a hard thing to do, to examine your life. Because you might have to change. You might have to get rid of some things. And so this idea of stress is, there's a kind of stress that comes from examining your afflictions, examining your ego, looking at your faults and bad habits, and changing them. There's no stress in looking at others' faults and bad habits. That is really fun. And it's really easy, and most of us have a discerning fourth dhyana concentration with that. We can spot someone else's faults and bad habits like nobody's business. But spotting one's own? Whoa. Terra incognita. This is ground we do not go on, right? And so that produces a kind of stress and discomfort. And even, I will say, if you have stress and discomfort because you don't fit in the world quite right, that's actually constructive. Be worried that you do. Be worried that you just fit in and match up and you're just a good old going along with everybody else. Be very, very careful of that drug, because that too is toxic and it's a poison. So what he's talking about here is a constructive stress that faces up to the emptiness of the ego, the emptiness of the self. And so that's why he goes on, those who cultivate in this way, if you do it in this way, you're certain to realize the awakening of a Buddha. And it's a transforming. My teacher used the word smelting. Transforming is kind of nice, right? Transmuting is nice. Smelting, that's a little down and dirty. That's what blacksmiths do. They smelt. And this is what it's like. When you work on your anger and your greed and your jealousy, and let me read the list, by the way. Here's what you're smelting. You are smelting greed or craving, anger, delusion, pride. Whoa, pride. Wrong views, wrong thinking, and I would say paralyzing skepticism. Okay? Then, on the minor level, you have wrath, enmity, hypocrisy, worry, jealousy, stinginess, trickery, deceit, arrogance, and causing injury. Woo! Well, I'm glad I didn't have any of those. Let's see what the next list is, right? And then you have, roughly bad translation, shamelessness or lack of really means lack of self-respect, lack of integrity. You do things and you cover it over and you don't pay attention to your conscience. You're very quick to defend it and just say, yeah, well, forget about it. Now there's a stirring. There's a movement inside. Tonight, if I had time, I'd read you a text where the Buddha's advising his son how to use this. But he starts by saying, be careful you don't lose this sense of integrity, this sense of self-respect, because once you do, you have no place to go. It's Shakespeare's thing. It's like, to thine own self be true, and it follows as the day and the night thou canst be untrue to any person. This is being true to yourself. This is respecting yourself. If you lose that compass, he's saying to his son Rahula, you're really in deep doo-doo, because you have nothing to steer by now. Because if you can fool others, but if you're starting to fool yourself, whoa, be careful. And then the last, here we go. Languor. Remember doing languor? Sounds like a town in Maine. It's not. What's languor? Languid.
Sluggish.
Well, yeah, it's like sluggish, laid back to the extreme, right? You know, it's like noon, and you're thinking, oh, I want to get up because I'm hungry. But if I get hungry, I'll get sleepy and go back to bed. What shall I do? Oh, well, and you roll over. And now it's 3 o'clock. Frivolity. Frivolity doesn't mean having fun. Frivolity means you're addicted to having fun. You're giddy, like bubbly all the time, and you take nothing seriously. Okay? That's frivolity. Here is non-belief. Now, non-belief doesn't mean non-belief in the Buddha and the Dharma and the Sangha. It doesn't mean not believing in your own essential nature, your own intrinsic nature. Because believing in the Buddha is only possible if you're believing in yourself. Okay? If you're believing in the Buddha and not believing in yourself, no Buddha is going to ever manifest. Sloth. I like that one. Because I think it's an animal too, isn't it? Now, sloth is languor taken to the next level. Okay? And then you have indolence. That's sometimes translated as laziness. Okay? And you're just kind of smoking your way through life. It's just one stone after another. Forgetfulness. Now, this is not clinical forgetfulness. That can sometimes happen. Okay, this is kind of forgetfulness because you're just so scattered. You're totally scattered. You're just divided. Distraction, and then non-discernment. So that's a list of some of the klesha, or the whānā. Now, later we'll go through this because he stresses this a lot, but you see all of those are not metaphysical and abstract. They're very human, very immediate qualities of person and character that we could work on. But to work on those means taking a little stress on. So one of the first things we did when we sort of got with our teacher, we did a little inventory. So you go through the list sort of, and you do the inventory, and it's on a scale of 1 to 10, where do you fit? 10 being the worst, and 1, and of course, 0, 0, 0. No. And then he would set up opportunities for you to see that maybe you did, in fact, have a little greed or pride or whatnot. So, and you go, oh, I think I should get a better teacher because this one's really rubbing me the wrong way. That kind of thing. So, anyhow, then he says, basically goes on, he says, why are there 84,000 wisdoms that come out of this single prajna? Because people have 84 different kinds of afflictions, of these whānā and kleshas. So the wisdom is meant to transform the opposite. So there's nothing that you can't come up with in your human nature, no matter how depraved, despicable, wrong, crooked, unhealthy, that can't be counteracted by this. So this is the full compass of the human potential. And that's why it says, where there are people, there are flies. Okay? Where there are people, there are flies, and Buddhas too. This is a little poem, and it means the human can be really messy and really not pure and really kind of defiled. But it's also the same place where Buddhas come from. So this is the meaning that this mind, or consciousness, whatever you call it, is the birthplace of all that is good and all that is evil, of all that is enlightened and all that's confused, of the demons and the Buddhas and all the realms come from this one mind, our mind. Depending on how we use it, it transforms. And that's why this language is so dynamic. It constantly transforms. There's no point of creation where it all began, and there's no point of ending where it stops. It's just constant coming and going, constant creating, constant happening. And so he's saying there's no attainment, there's just this moment now. What are you doing with your mind right now? That is the transforming that's going on. You're transforming it either into awakening or goodness and wisdom, or you're letting it go into the opposite. But it's happening here and now, always in the present moment. So that's what he means by using wisdom. I told the story just recently about tell again when we were just in L.A. because the thing we did in L.A. we called the workshop Buddhism Unplugged. I really like that one. And this is Buddhism Unplugged, the Sixth Patriarch teaching, which is called Dun Jiao, meaning the direct teaching, is Buddhism Unplugged. This just cuts away all the electronics, all the hyper. What does unplugged mean? Doesn't it mean acoustic? Acoustic. and no band and strings, and right, it's almost like you're there in your jeans and your flannel shirt with your acoustic guitar, and you're singing straight. It's, you know, so there's unplugged poetry too. There's an unplugged all sorts of things, but it means stripping away all the superficial accoutrements that lay over the top, so you get to the raw thing. Getting the varnish and paint off a nice piece of furniture until you can see the grain of the wood again. That's unplugged. So what he's doing is Buddhism unplugged here. He's bringing it right past the Buddhism Bodhisattvas, all the meditation practice, saying, it's your own heart, your own mind. Listen to that sound. That's where all Buddhas come from. So we did that. That was the workshop in LA, Buddhism Unplugged. I thought it'd be appropriate for LA because it's all plugged in. So we did it unplugged. But one of the things, just one of the stories I told was a personal story about getting at the defiling afflictions and how hard it is. So what happens in this skandha mapping, at one point during the day, during the week, during our lifetimes, this stuff is like clay, our personality and our habits and whatnot, and we can move it or not. But if we don't keep working with it, it starts to harden. And it gets harder and harder too. And so that 4 skandhas, when it's really been hardened, almost impossible to work with. And it's at that point where these things that I just mentioned get buried so deeply as it to be almost not evident to oneself. It's really amazing. It's like the deepest affliction or the deepest knot we have is the one that we're least aware of consciously. And it's not that we're not aware because we're not smart. We're not aware of it because we have covered it over and we have ensconced it in defensive mechanisms that keep us from seeing it. And in a funny sense, it works. See, this is the problem with it. It works. To get angry works. We have found that by getting angry in certain situations, we get our way. Okay? It's a really funny thing. And so if they didn't work at all, but they work in a maladaptive way, that's the problem with these things. They work in a limited way, but in a larger way, they tie us up. But we lose sense of that. So anyhow, I mentioned to you I grew up with 3 sisters, so I was really good at finding faults, theirs. And I was really good at ignoring anything they said about me that wasn't flattery. I got really good at that. My selective perception was, if I heard, I could tell by the tone. See, if they'd say, Marty, oh, yes. Mart, oh, it's gone. Because I would suspect criticism coming, which was completely wrong and untruthful, and why would I bother to listen to it? So I would tune it out. So I never heard them telling me certain things about my character when I was growing up. Hence, I grew up to be well and healthy and strong and self-inflated to the extreme. So when I went to the monastery for the first time, I told you the story, but I walked in, and I had some difficulty because people were bowing. And they were bowing to these images, and that was difficult enough. But then the teacher, the master, came down and they bowed to him. And they thought, oh, no way, God, this is terrible. I mean, bowing to another person. What is he? Who's that? You know, come on. I was brought up Catholic, so bowing to the images is bad enough. To bow to another person is worse than idolatry. It's cultish, you know, unless it's a Hollywood star. You know. But anyway, so I just sat there and. I mentioned that during the lecture, it was an Abhitamsika lecture, and during the lecture he just sort of paused and he said, no, what is emptiness? You know, emptiness means you're just not full of yourself. Like, well, what? Sunyata was, no, it's not full of yourself. And he says, most people are quite full of themselves. In fact, they always want people to praise them, and they're afraid of criticism, and so they wear a high hat. They want a high hat, that's a term used, which is a Chinese expression for pride, arrogance, to have a high hat. And they just simply can't see any value in respecting or anybody else and so on and so forth. And I'm feeling a little uncomfortable as he's talking. I mean, there's many people here tonight, and I'm way in the back there, and I'm kind of feeling like the spotlight's starting to go. And he said, this is called the obstacle of arrogance and pride. And I was thinking, yeah, wow, I'm glad I don't have that one. You know, I have least of anybody. But I was feeling really uncomfortable with that, and part of it, and then he said at one time, it's like this old story you've all heard about the scholar who visits the Zen master, and the scholar's got all his ideas and opinions, and he wants to challenge the master, and the master first serves him tea, pours the tea into the cup, and then it starts flowing over the side, and it doesn't stop, and then and the scholar says, can't you see, stupid, the cup's already filled, and you're spilling it over. And he says, so are some people, they're full of their opinions, and they have no room to receive anything. So he told the story. Now I'm feeling really uncomfortable, because I was a smart graduate student at the time, and then, I was like, all of this, and suddenly I realized, that's me. Whoa, that be me. And it wasn't fun, it was stressful. And so I thought, and I just sat there. I don't know what the rest of the lecture was about. I just sat there thinking, wow. And the insight at the time was, he knows me better than I know myself. Because I had gotten to this point, 28 years old, and I never had a thought that I was arrogant. Wow. And I was extremely so. And so it was like, this was shocking, it was hard to take, but the most important moment was that he knew me better than I knew myself, and that, I thought, was something I should pay respect to. But how was I going to pay respect? So I thought, well, that's probably why those people are kind of bowing, And I suppose I could maybe, like do a bow, but I didn't, again, want to do it with everybody watching. So what happened, everybody sort of lined up. He would sit on the bench and he'd ask personal questions and whatnot. How's your kids and family and blah, blah, blah. And people would be down and, with folded hands listening to him and whatnot. So I thought, I was way in the back. And I got down and looked left and right. There was nobody there. And I was going to do a quick bow to the teacher, get rid of my arrogance. And so, and show respect for you knew me better than myself. And so I quickly went down with a bow, and you go down, you open your hands like this, right? And I came back up, and when I came back up, the waters of the Red Sea had parted. So apparently, I learned this later, when I was down on my bow, he knew I was back there, and when I went down on the bow, he told everybody to separate. And so suddenly, when I came up, boom, there was me facing the teacher, everybody on the side sort of looking at me, and I thought, oh man! I probably turned 50 shades of red. And like, and I was so vulnerable and so exposed. I really did want to do it, but I didn't want people to see me doing it. Now, there's a little pride there. Whoa, the irony of this is just overwhelming. And he just looked at me, he smiled, and he says, does it hurt? So that was my first encounter. So I share this story with you is to bring out that this is one of the major afflictions, pride, hubris, or arrogance, and yet, in oneself, these things are really hard to spot. And so, partly, the cultivation effort consists of creating situations in which this poison or toxin can come to the surface and come out. And that's why I say at the beginning it can be stressful. It's not like you come in and say, oh, meditation, nirvana, whoa, I knew it was fun and easy. No, it's not like that. It's like all that stuff has to be transmuted first because that's what's covering it over. I'm sorry, how do you get rid of it? To give an unpleasant example, when we were really sick, my mother used to force us to put our, on the back of her tongue and then expurge the stuff in the belly because you couldn't get it out. You had to vomit it out, then, you'd feel better. But it wasn't fun to do that. I hated doing that. But when it was done, I always felt better. In the same way, these poisons, these toxins, have to be brought out. The ground has to be cleansed and returned. It has to be this detoxification of a sense. And for to do that is a constructive stress that ends the big stress. So that's what Lao Tzu says, many small difficulties at the end, great ease, big ease. Many small easies at the end, great difficulty. So this small getting rid of these things is important. I won't play that role. I'm not going to try to spot these things. You just have to do it yourself. Yes?
84,000 and 10,000, are they the same thing, or do they mean different things?
They mean a lot. They mean a lot.
Yeah,
Yeah, you can think of, you take one thing like thirst, craving. How many faces does thirst have? Wow. This one thing is got 10,000 faces.
But those particular numbers, do they mean anything?
They just mean that the proliferation of these tendencies can be boundless.
Okay.
Anger, different ways of being angry, from mild, just irritation, to full-blown violent rage. And everything in between is on the spectrum of anger. So I'm saying these are lists, but you got to really unpack them. Something like jealousy or envy, it can be very, very subtle. And it can be very, very gross. It's the stuff, if you read Shakespearean tragedies, you see these elements weaving through that cause tragedies. But again, it's very interesting about the tragedies. The hero in the tragedy is blind to his or own hubris. You know what I mean? So in the tragedy, you see, oh my God, he's running to the cliff and he's going to go off. And he's like, what do you think of my space? He's running, going, no. And actually the Greek chorus comes in. He's about to die. He's going over the hill. And, everybody hears it, but he never hears the Greek chorus. And you're going, and this is why your emotions get so stirred up in these Greek tragedies, because they are hitting at something human. We are all of us in this, and we don't hear the chorus, right? And so it can manifest in, so 84 or 10,000 are just basically terminology for the proliferation of these things into many, many facets and dimensions. You try to curb your thirst, and it's really interesting. You push it down here, and it comes up here. This is like extreme neuroplasticity, oh, I'm going to curb my desire for food and sugar. Boom. Oh, I want to be famous. And I put fame down, and I got this sexual craving. I put the sexual craving down, and I'm tired. I want to sleep a lot. It's just like you push it down and just keeps it like a water balloon. You squeeze it here, and it comes out there. This is what it means by 84,000, 10,000. So getting at the root is really tricky. Anyhow, we'll stop for tonight, do the transference in English. Any announcements or?
Tomorrow we have 9 o'clock service, funeral service from 9 to 10:30. Vegan lunch, 1 o'clock Buddha's name recitation until 3. From 3 to 5 will be calligraphy lessons. 5:15 meditation, 6:30 evening ceremony, and 7:30 Avatamsaka Sutra lecture. And on Monday will be Buddhism from the Modern Mind. 7:30.
What?
Buddhism for the Modern Mind.
Oh.
By Doug Powers. 7:30.
Okay. Those of you need it in English, if you don't know the words, we could hand out some. You have some there? Yeah, okay. May every living being, our minds as one and radiant with light, share the fruits of peace with hearts of goodness, luminous and bright. If people hear and see how hands and hearts can find in giving unity, may their minds awake to great compassion, wisdom, and to joy. May kindness find reward. May all who sorrow leave their grief and pain. May this boundless light break the darkness of their endless night. Because our hearts are one, this world of pain turns into paradise. May all become compassionate and wise. May all become compassionate and wise. Ding Li San Bao.